the ACLU this year launched a program to focus on prosecutors. And Jessica Ayoub is with us right now on the Oakland County MegaCast. She's the public engagement strategist for the ACLU. Why focus on the prosecutors, Jessica?
Yeah, that is a great question. So obviously, as you mentioned, there is a huge election tomorrow, but also up for election is county prosecuting attorney, not just in Oakland County, but actually statewide prosecutors are up for election. And prosecuting attorneys are locally elected officials who are the most influential player in the criminal legal system. Your prosecuting attorney decides who to charge, what to charge, and ultimately how many folks sit behind bars in your community. And they have more power and opportunity than any other elected official to end this cycle of mass incarceration that Michigan is facing.
So we should say ACLU is a nonpartisan group. However,
Absolutely.
you have taken on this mission. Why is it important to recognize what's going on in our legal system, and what do you and the others within your organization want to see change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So prosecuting attorneys is an important race for all of the reasons I just mentioned. And as a nonpartisan organization, we certainly won't support or endorse a candidate. But what we want to do is really uncover the role of a prosecuting attorney. Too many voters don't know, one, that their prosecuting attorneys are elected, and two, that their prosecuting attorneys have a lot of influence over what happens in their courtroom, or in the courtroom and in the criminal legal system in general. So here in Michigan, we are facing an incarceration crisis. The number of folks who are incarcerated is climbing. We're seeing huge racial disparities in terms of who is incarcerated in the state, but also in Oakland County. And so what we want to ask of prosecutors is that they make a pledge to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated in their county, tackle the racial disparities that they're seeing in the criminal legal system, and overall increase the transparency of what happens in their office, really uncovering their charging decisions, who accepts a plea deal, who gets offered a plea deal, who is charged with certain crimes and why they're charged with those crimes, so that the public can see how these elected officials are fulfilling their campaign pledges, and the public can decide if these elected officials are representing them.
Yeah, because so many times it does seem like they're operating behind a veil of secrecy. We are privy to those decisions, but not how they came to those decisions so many times. Jessica Ayoub with us here on the Oakland County MegaCast. She's the public engagement strategist with the ACLU. One of the things, any focus on the judges as well, because judges have a lot of power within the courtroom. But I know when I've tried to do my research, when it comes to the election and you're trying to do your research on the judges, there's not a lot of information out there that's available for people to be able to get their hands on.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we've been focusing on this election cycle is actually getting voters to realize that they do have to vote for judges, because they're in the nonpartisan section of the ballot. What we're seeing is a lot of folks don't realize that if they're voting straight party or if they're voting for individual candidates, they actually have to fill out their full ballot to vote for judges. So right now, we are just increasing attention on that nonpartisan section of the ballot to make sure voters know to fill it out, and that they have a say in those folks and who sits on the benches here in Michigan.
Yeah, and while the judges are nonpartisan, many times they are also appointed or pushed behind one party or the other. So people should know that, to do a little bit of homework to know before you go in, because obviously this year the Michigan State Supreme Court is a huge, hotly contested office or election this year. especially coming out of the decision following the governor's executive order. So there's a big push to get some of the Democratic preferences, let's just say that, preferences elected to that position as well. One of the things, Macomb County, a big switch there after Eric Smith was indicted. So that's a shakeup in Macomb County. But one of the things I would say, and I invite people to do, is go through their campaign finance reports. I think a lot of people don't realize that information is available to the public.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. And, as we mentioned, our goal really is increasing transparency of these prosecuting attorneys and their offices and their plans for their office. And so in service of that, in June of this year, we sent a candidate survey to all candidates for prosecuting attorney across the state and gathered their responses. And you can see how they responded to our candidate survey at smartjusticemi.org.
And do you think when they're filling out those surveys, are they actually being honest, or are they putting what they know organizations such as yours wants to hear?
So I think they're being honest, but the beauty of the ACLU is that we don't exist just in election cycles. And so we've got these responses, we've got these commitments from candidates, and depending how things turn out tomorrow, we will be there to hold candidates accountable to what they promised and make sure that they are representing what their community demanded.
One of the things that we are seeing during the COVID crisis, some of the jails as well as the prisons are releasing nonviolent prisoners or others to try to address the overcrowding that's happened in some of our jails and prisons. Do you think what they've learned from this crisis can stay after the pandemic, if we ever get to that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What we're seeing now is that we're able to release folks from jail who are not posing a threat to their community, and that is a practice that should stay well after the pandemic. Folks should not be incarcerated because they can't afford bail. They should not be incarcerated during a public health crisis, right? When we know that jails are overcrowded. And so what we're seeing is that reducing our jail population is possible, and keeping our communities safe while doing that is possible.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously no judge wants to be the person who released someone and then they go out and they recommit a violent crime, because that could be a detriment to the community, but also to the judge or prosecutor's career. But on the other side, they don't have a crystal ball to know who is going to reoffend and who isn't.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking particularly at folks who are incarcerated in jail right now, about 60% of the folks who are in jail here in Michigan have not been convicted of a crime. So these are folks who have been charged with something, but they've not yet been convicted. And what we're seeing is that these folks are staying incarcerated because they can't afford to post their bail. And when they can't afford to post their bail, they're at a greater risk for losing their job, losing their housing, being separated from their family, potentially losing custody of their kids. And there are all of these collateral consequences that we're seeing individuals who get entangled with the criminal legal system, really being up against when we know that there's a better way. And, the fact that we've been able to release so many folks during the pandemic just shows that there is a better way.
One of the things when we're looking at that, is this part of an overall plan or structure to try to reevaluate our bail system in America?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ACLU of Michigan has been embarking on a campaign called the Campaign for Smart Justice for about 3 years now. And the goals of that campaign are to cut mass incarceration in half in Michigan and to challenge the racism that we see in the criminal legal system. And right now, one of the hallmarks of that campaign is reforming Michigan's pretrial system. So the governor appointed a pretrial task force about a year ago, and they released a series of comprehensive recommendations on what could happen to reform Michigan's pretrial system. And so our campaign for smart justice is really focused on working with the state legislature to implement those reforms as comprehensively and as meaningfully as possible so that we can start seeing some of these reductions in incarceration here in Michigan.
Jessica Ayoub with us here on the Oakland County MegaCast. She's the public engagement strategist with the ACLU. Jessica, just a couple more minutes with you before we let you go. Anything else going on with the ACLU and the work that you and your team are doing here in the state of Michigan that you want the viewers and listeners to know?
Yeah, it would be remiss of me to not remind folks that there is a huge election tomorrow, and it is critically important that voters' voices are heard. And so we want folks to make sure that they've got a plan to vote. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow. And if anyone has any issues at the polls or just questions about their voting rights, we want them to give us a call at 866-OUR-VOTE. That's 866-OUR-VOTE. And we would love to walk folks through any challenges they're experiencing. But, we're looking forward to seeing really incredible turnout tomorrow.
I think we've already seen an incredible turnout, and the polls haven't even voted. People are definitely taking advantage of voting absentee this year. Hey, quickly before we let you go, when it comes to so many of the prisoners or people that are locked up right now, have you been hearing directly from them and their family members about what they're going through behind bars in some of the jails and prisons? Because obviously a lot of times we do have people on from the Department of Corrections, but you're getting the spin. What are you hearing from the people that are actually locked up behind bars right now?
Yeah, so we have been hearing from folks who are incarcerated throughout the pandemic, just about some really not great conditions. There have been reports of folks not having enough proper sanitizing equipment, the fact that it's nearly impossible to quarantine or self-quarantine or social distance even while folks are incarcerated. And so what we're seeing, what we're hearing from the inside is that it's nearly impossible to follow the CDC guidelines for combating COVID-19. And so we've got our legal team is hard at work working to make sure that folks' rights are not being violated while they're incarcerated.
Jessica Ayoub with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. She's the public engagement strategist with the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, joining us on the program today. And Jessica, just another couple of minutes with you before we will say goodbye today. Is there anything else that would be important for our audience to know right now from your organization or about the issues at hand in terms of down-ballot races that are maybe not getting the attention that they should locally, or anything else that you would like to say today that would be important for our audience to know?
Yeah, I would say before you cast your ballot, visit smartjusticemi.org and see where the candidates for prosecuting attorney in your community land on a number of key issues, whether that's decarceration, whether that's racial justice, transparency, broad accountability. We want voters to know how their candidates have pledged and that they have a voice in electing folks who represent their values.
And with that, Jessica, just a quick question. One of the things that I found is when people are voting for prosecutors or judges, especially when it's a prosecutor, if you go through their campaign finance reform, all their payments, right, and their donations, so many of those donations come from the attorneys that are appearing before them. Is this a conflict of interest? To me, it just seems like a crazy way for us to elect our prosecutors as well as our judges, and then typically it's the people that are going to be standing before them to hear their cases heard are the ones who are donating, because they know who donates to their campaigns and who doesn't.
Sure. So for us, that's really where the transparency piece comes in. If the candidate, obviously campaign finance records are public record. And then if we've got prosecutors in office who are regularly and publicly posting data, we can then hold them accountable so that nothing goes untouched, and they're not able to have those conflicts of interest, and they're not able to do anything that might not be on par with what they pledged as a candidate.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you go back and you look, and in the Eric Smith case out of Macomb County, when you go back and you start looking at the campaign donations, you can see a pattern there. And so we encourage all people to do that. It is free for you to do an online search. So if you just Google your candidate's name, campaign donations, and it will take you to the link to the clerk's office for you to be able to do so. If you haven't voted yet, it's just another thing to try to do your homework before you go in and actually vote. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.